Hello and good evening. Welcome to Arsenal Analysed. I'm JC. I hope everyone is doing well. Today, I bring you yet another live show during the World Cup, one a week, joined by a couple of good friends, whilst we look at two different, very interesting subjects. First of all, for the first part of today's live show, we're going to be rating, if you will, the Arsenal players so far this season. And then for the second half of today's show, we'll be giving our thoughts and opinions on the best Premier League 11 also so far this season. So if you are looking forward to today's live show, go ahead and smash that like button. If you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe and also get involved in the chat. We will be looking at your answers to some of these questions, and they may sway us in where we put a player in rating them or positioning them in our so far 11 this season. But before we get started, let me introduce the guests. And for those regulars, you should know these faces already. But just in case you don't, to my left, yes, is Keith, co-host of Arsenal Analysed. How are we doing this evening, my friend?
I'm really good, mate. I'm a bit worried about you, though. I think maybe you've got like really low standards or not very many friends because you keep asking me to come back. For which I'm eternally grateful. But yeah, thank you very much for having me back on, mate. And I hope you're well.
Yes, much better now compared to earlier this week. But really looking forward to hearing some of your opinions this evening on what we've got lined up. And regular on the show, panelist Neil, how are we doing this evening, my friend?
I'm good. A little bit toasted, but I'm good. Thank God for that. Yeah, man. Happy to be back. Happy to be back on.
Always a pleasure. And we've got Judge, always the comedian, down in the comments already. Unfortunately, he was unable to join us.
What do you mean?
Unable to join us this evening due to work commitments. And John, who was also supposed to join us this evening, is unavailable, but he could potentially join up with us a little later on during today's live show. Just before we get started as well, just need to remind everyone that there are new memberships available on the channel, an opportunity for you subscribers to get involved in these live shows, I suppose, and featuring them, get involved in the opinions that we give. So do check them out if you get an opportunity. But you being here and viewing the show with us is all I can ask for. But let's waste no more time at all and dive into the very first part of today's live show, which is, we'll be looking at this Arsenal 11 and seeing, hopefully it'll work. There we are. Perfect. Brilliant. There are no IT issues so far. All going to plan.
Fingers crossed.
But, yes, fingers crossed. And Neil is supposed to have paid his internet bill as well, so it should be okay.
Definitely.
I'm sure Judge will, I'm sure Tony will remind us at some point in the chat, as he loves to do. But as you can see to my side, we have 5 tiers, undroppable, so players that we feel have just been so good this season will be going into this category. Good players will be players that will probably be playing most of the games, 80 to 90% of games so far this season. Average players that probably can sort of be coming in and out of the side. Players that could be doing better. And then players that we could be looking to potentially move on, whether that be a loan in January or potentially even a sale. And for some of those eagle-eyed viewers towards the bottom of that list, yes, there are some players on this list that have either already moved on via sales or loans. We won't be looking at those players. It's just part of the list, so completely ignore it. But we will be looking at goalkeepers to begin with. And no, I'm not saying that we're looking to move on Aaron Ramsdale or Turner. But in that first section there, we've got our goalkeepers. Keith, I'm going to come to you first. I want to hear your opinions on Aaron Ramsdale, probably one of the easiest players to speak about in this list. Give me your thoughts. Which section do you think he should find himself in?
My man is undroppable. Undroppable. I've been a bit concerned with his distribution out of his feet from on the ground. When he first, I think we spoke about this last week, but in his first few games, like his distribution with his feet was absolutely amazing, and he seems to be lacking a little bit of confidence, but it's still there. And when you look at, I mean, Turner's done all right, but yeah, Rambo's undroppable for me. And I love watching it's about more than just being able to be a shot stopper, command your box. You look at his rapport with the players in front of him, and I don't think it's any surprise that defensively we improved when he came into the team. He has such a great rapport with his back four.
Yeah.
I just love everything about him. His personality, and they have the goalkeepers union there. They claim to be a little bit mad, and he definitely is in the right way. So for me, he is undroppable. Regarding Matt Turner, not seeing a huge amount of him other than in the Europa. He looked quite good for the States last night, to be fair.
He did,
and I would class him as good. He hasn't done anything to suggest that he needs to be lower than good, average, could do better, or move him out. Matt's good as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Neil, you've heard what Keith's had to say. Ramsdale and Turner are positioned where they are. Do you agree, or should we be looking to move them from the spots that they're in at the moment?
Personally, I I go with the intention that no one is undroppable.
Okay.
So I would move Ramsdale to good, keep Matt Turner an average. He looked pretty decent last night, but again, England made the US look good last night. So I would move Turner down to average, and I would move Ramsdale down to good.
Okay. No, I understand.
Crowd, Neil. Tough crowd.
Very tough crowd. I want high standards at my football club. High.
Yes. No, we all do. We all do. I think the only reason why I would keep Aaron Ramsdale, the only sort of difference, the only thing that hasn't really kind of been mentioned so far is that, when you take Aaron Ramsdale away, that quality, that golfing quality between him and Turner, for me, that's what makes him undroppable. If there was a Leno Ramsdale scenario when we first bought him, where we had that competitiveness, it makes it a little bit different. But I think that if Aaron Ramsdale was to get injured for like 6 months, would be in some real big danger. And I think for that reason, for me, it makes him undroppable. But I do agree with you, Neil, on the average for Turner, because there were a couple of occasions when I saw him in the Europa League when he was tested. He did look a little bit, I don't know if it was nerves, because obviously it's a big club coming from the States to come and play for a club like Arsenal. I don't know if it's nerves. I don't know if it's the quality there. We've got Runarsson in this list who we won't be discussing, but when we saw him between the sticks, he was awful. He was absolutely awful. And I don't think that was nerves. That was just down to, and being polite, that was just because the quality just wasn't there. So for me, from what we've discussed so far, I think that's a good place to put these guys. And looking at Judge's comments here, Ramsdale gets an 8 out of 10, magnificent goalkeeper. Passion is solid. Yep. And I think he's on the same page with what we're talking about with regards to Turner as well, which brings us on to the next position, which is right back. We've got Cedric, Tomiyasu, and Ben White, although Tomiyasu has played left back as well this season. Solid option. Keith, I'm going to come back to you again for your opinions on these three players who are supposed to be playing right back. Ben White's potentially a centre back as well, but basing it on this season so far, what are your thoughts on these players and which categories do you think they should fall into?
I'll start with Cedric. He's bottom tier for me. He's surplus to requirements. He did quite well to start with. Then he was another one. He got moved out to the left and had an absolute stinker. And it feels like he hasn't regained his confidence since then. And I've got no problem with him, but I think he's probably just surplus to requirements. So I'll keep him exactly where he is at the moment.
Okay.
Tommy's one, man, so many injuries. If he could stay fit, he would be somewhere between undroppable and good, because, as you said, he can play anywhere across that back line.
Yeah.
And if he stays fit, he's one of those who is he's integral to our growth and our development. But at the moment, I would have Tommy as good, probably no higher than that. Because, like I say, he has 4 or 5 games. Then there's an injury, normally his calves or something. But when he's been fit and he's kept his place in the side, I've been super impressed with him, and he fits the mould as well. He fits the mould for what Arteta and Edu are looking for, and they clearly like a taller fullback.
Yes.
The back post challenges and what have you. So he goes for good. As for Benny Blanco, I wasn't sold on him as a fullback the first 2 or 3 games. There were a couple of times his distribution was a bit off the mark, and there were a couple of times he put Saliba right in it, and Saliba
I agree.
dig his way out. But as Benny's gone on and he's got more used to the role, and you look at his rapport and his understanding with Bukayo Saka down that right-hand side, again, another thing we spoke about last week, the amount of times he'll overlap without even realising or without expecting to get the ball, just to create that space for other players. He's incredibly unselfish. He's incredibly good on the ball. He can play there. He can play centre-back. He can probably play CDM as well. And he... I wouldn't class him as undroppable, but I'd also class him as a little bit better than good. So if there was like a little subsection,
a little in between,
yeah, but I don't think he's undroppable. So I'll just call him good, but very good.
Fair. Scott coming in with a comment that I brought up on screen just a moment, classing Ben White as undroppable based on the first half of season. 4 massively surpassed expectations at right back, which, to be fair, I think is very much the same for a lot of Arsenal fans this season. Not a lot of us thought that he'd play as well as he has done at right back, but credit where credit's due. Very adaptive and where he plays. So, Neil, coming to you with these 3 players. I've locked them in where they are at the moment, subject to change before we move on to left back. What are your thoughts on those 3 players? Should we be looking to move them around, or do you agree with what Keith has said?
No, I agree 100% with what Keith's saying here. Like Cedric he needs to be moved on. Not even loaned out, but moved on completely. I don't see him getting into the face team unless if it's like a cup game or something and we're trying to rest players. Yeah. And even then, that's a huge risk because you don't want to get kicked out of the cup for like a weak player that doesn't suit the team anymore. Like the team has moved on completely from these types of players. So yeah, I think it's time for us to move him on. As for Benjamin White and Tomiyasu, I agree here as well. Like they're good players. I wouldn't, like I said, there's no such thing as an undroppable player because something could happen to a player's mentality and he could go on have 3, 4, 5 bad games, and that could result into some pretty serious repercussions for the team overall. So I agree with keeping them at the good spot.
As referee in all of this, it's hard to argue with either of you for the cases that you've put forward for these 3 players. And I'm not too sure if you guys have as well, but I've seen rumours starting already on Cedric front with regards to a move elsewhere, a Premier League move as well, which is, he probably is a Premier League quality player. In all fairness to him, he's a decent player, but not at the standard whereby, he should be playing and pushing for a starting spot each and every week. In all fairness to him. Judge coming in here saying Tomiyasu definitely good. Benjamin, not Ben, we mustn't get that wrong, is definitely good. Neither undroppable, but definitely good. And Scott also coming in here with a controversial take, maybe, but I wouldn't move a single player on from the squad unless replacements was signed. Squad depth is terrifying for me. I completely agree. At the moment, there are positions that we need squad depth in, and that's not even looking at other roles where if there were injuries, it would be squeaky bum time to say the very least. So, Neil, I'm going to come to you next on left back. We've got 2 players there. barring Tomiyasu, who has featured there a few times this season.
Yeah.
The two players in question are Kieran Tierney and Alexander Zinchenko, who have both had their injury worries already this season and previous seasons. So what are your thoughts based purely on form in this first half of the season for these two players? Which categories do they fit into?
Like first half of the season has been good. We've been really good. But the fact that both these guys are injured so often, it's a huge concern. It's a hole just waiting to be attacked, because I could see where something can happen where one player is injured, he's not available, and then during a game a player can get injured, and what happens then? Like, I know we have Tomiyasu, but he as well is injury prone. It's a worry. It's a worry. It's a concern. Thank God we're not there yet. I'm not trying to jinx the team. I would put both Kieran Tierney and Zinchenko at good.
Okay. It's fair assessment. It is a fair assessment. And Keith, are you going to argue with that? Are you going to want to change it?
No, I can't disagree with Neil there. I would say when both are fully fit and fully fit for a decent period of time, I would probably choose Zinchenko over KT, just purely because I think Zinchenko has more adaptability. For example, to go inverted, as we've said before. Having said that, I think KT's probably better when he's got an out-and-out winger against him. But Zinchenko is better on the ball, and there's been a few times earlier on in the season when it looked like he was under pressure, and he's very, very calm.
Yes.
In those situations.
Yeah.
But no, I can't agree with Neil. I can't disagree with Neil. I can't agree with you, Neil. I think both good, because just can't keep them fit for more than 5 or 6 games.
Yeah. Hard to argue with both of you on all of the points made. And I think one thing I really like about both of these players is they're not the same type of left back. Kieran Tierney very good at getting forward, providing width beyond the players we saw in the season prior to Zinchenko coming in. And the season before that, when we were in the Europa League, and how effective he was in getting beyond his man and being really, really dangerous from an attacking point of view. And as you mentioned, Keith, Zinchenko very good at coming inside as that inverted fullback, making those numbers up in midfield. Now, I love that competition, and I love that variety as well, because depending on who we're playing, if, fingers crossed, they're both fit and available, it gives Arteta options. And in previous seasons, we haven't had that. Very, very interesting, but always very good points made by the panel. And Neil, as I came to Keith on the first 2 sets of players, I'm going to do the same for yourself. And next up, we have centre-backs. We have Gabriel. We have Saliba. That's been the partnership throughout the season so far. And reliable Rob Holding, who comes up in the last 10 to 15 minutes of most games when we're winning to make sure the victory is sealed. So what are your thoughts on these 3 players, and where do they fit into these categories?
I would put Saliba and Gabriel at in that bar of good. I want to spend some time on reliable Rob Holding. I just feel like he could do better. But before we put him into place there, like, he has been also like a Elneny for us, in the sense that he carries out, like, he had a few sticky moments, like against Tottenham and getting a red card and stuff like that. But outside of that, like, he has genuinely been a decent enough player for X amount of minutes during a game when we needed him, I remember him playing when we played Chelsea, and he had Diego Costa in his pocket.
He did.
So those type of performances, I always remember, and I remember how crucial that performance was for our season at the time. So I would put him at average. Final.
Okay, no problem. I think most Arsenal fans probably understand the role that Rob Holding plays in this side, and he seems quite content in that role. He doesn't seem to be a player that wants to kind of really, aggravate things in trying to, really push the two players that have been playing well there this season and previous season, Ben White with Gabriel. So he knows his role. He's a good squad player to have, but I wouldn't say that he's someone that should be playing week in, week out, like you said. The only player that is a potential question mark in terms of category for me is Saliba, but I'm not going to go into any detail on that until I've heard what Keith's had to say.
So
I'm going to keep you waiting.
Before Keith starts, I just want to say Messi has broken the seal for Argentina.
Oh, interesting.
So, carry on, Keith. Sorry about that.
No problem, mate. Right, I'll carry on with reliable Rob. He's what I would call a proper clubman.
Yeah.
He's always there. He's like part of the furniture. I remember watching some of the stuff he was talking about in the All or Nothing documentary.
Yeah.
And as Neil correctly pointed out, the first time I really noticed him was the cup final against Chelsea. And I was really worried with him going up against Diego Costa. And he did. He bantered him. He really got under his skin. And he did have him in his pocket. Having said that, I can't put Rob anywhere above average because he's never going to be, when everyone's fit, he's not going to be starting. But he's one of those, he's one of those you want to keep there until his legs give out and just keep him as part of the club because it's about a lot more than just what they do on the pitch. It's the influence behind the scenes. It's the influence he has on younger lads coming through. So he's middle of the road is our Rob, but definitely average. Moving on to Gabriel, I've said before, he hasn't quite hit the heights of last season. It's looked like I don't know whether it's confidence or concentration levels. He struggled a bit more this season, but he's still weighing in with goals. He's still an absolutely exceptional footballer. So I would keep him as good. And Neil probably won't like this because he doesn't like the undroppable tag. But as William Saliba, based on where we are and how we've played so far, he is head and shoulders, not just above Arsenal central defenders, but central defenders in the Premier League.
You've nicked it off me. You've got my script, you have, Keith.
Undroppable. I can see it.
My script. I completely agree with you on your assessment, Keith. Arguably the best centre-back in the Premier League this season, if not in the top 2 or 3, at the very least, if push come to shove. And for that reason, based on the first half of our season's form, Saliba for me is undroppable. He has just been absolutely exceptional. He's surpassed a lot of people's expectations in the sense that he's a young lad coming from a not as good league. Not many people thought he'd be thrown in the deep end and show the consistency and the quality that he has shown, and he's just really grabbed it with both hands and gone with it. So for me, based on the way he's played this season, he's undroppable. But I do agree with both of you on Rob Holding and Gabriel as well. Don't forget to get your comments down in the chat box if you disagree or you agree or you have an opinion on any of these players in the sections they should be falling into. Make sure you get your comments on. We will look at them and potentially change things depending on what you have to say. But moving on to our next section, Keith, I'm going to come to you on this one. And I think the 2 players I want to speak about next are Elneny and Thomas Partey as your so-called number 6s in this side. You could potentially put Sambi into that category, but I think he's kind of been sort of pushed into that category at times due to injuries. I think long-term, he's probably a number 8, or at least that's where he wants to play. So we'll probably look at Sambi and Xhaka together. But Keith, what are your thoughts on Elneny and Thomas Partey?
Okay, I'll start with Mo. I love Mo. He's not the best footballer in the world, but he's another. He's cut from the same cloth as Rob Holding. Really, he loves the club. Um, he loves being there. He's a good influence around everyone else, and that is exactly where I would put him. Is average. The back end of last season, when Partey was injured, and him and Granit Xhaka, they did a good job together. And
Yeah,
this guy will run through a brick wall for our football club. And if you're not the best footballer in the world, that is my minimum expectation, that you will run yourself into the ground for us, basically. And that's what you always get from Mo. He's got a few exceptional goals in his locker as well. He's never one to like just scuff it in or score a tap in. It's normally an exceptional finish from about 35 yards. But no, I love him. He's one that needs to be kept around because, as Scott said in the chat, actually, such a good point about the depth of our squad. We've spoken before about the gap between the starting 11 and the fringe players. There's less of a gap with Mo, I think, because he's been around for so long. So he's average. But the man you're spinning around there is another one, undroppable.
Oof.
I would not have said this before this season, but you really, really notice it when he is not there.
You do.
We're seeing La Liga Thomas Partey now. It's took him a while to get used to things. Touch wood, no injury issues for a little while now. And he's getting goals as well. Like we said last week, like I'm not getting any Premier League balls landing in my back garden this season. Last year it was ridiculous. I made a fortune, but no, undroppable for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the Thomas Partey thing because it's especially this season, maybe not so much in previous seasons because we haven't had that consistency over sort of 10, 15 games. But when Thomas Partey doesn't play, it's a massive difference, and you can notice it immediately when he doesn't play. There's a huge difference in the way Arsenal move the ball, whether it's keeping the ball, moving the ball forward, long balls, the tempo of the game, the whole shebang for me. Neil, are you gonna? I know you don't like the undroppable tag, but what are your thoughts on the two players in question here?
I agree with Keith here. The only thing I would say is that the fact that Thomas Partey does have an injury in him.
He does.
That's the only reason why I wouldn't have him in the on the undroppable bar. I feel like that's something that we always need to be concerned about. And he's given us reason to be. I feel like at his age now, Thomas Partey, the form that he's had obviously is one of the reasons why we are where we are.
Yes.
But at the same time, like, come not this window, but the summer window, like, we need to be looking at a potential replacement for Thomas Partey, someone that should be coming in at least at that point to start shadowing him and understanding how he plays. Because I'm not sure if Sambi is supposed to be that person, but definitely we'll get to Sambi when we get to Sambi. But I'll keep it as is for Keith with what Keith said here.
Okay, no problem. Well, as you mentioned, Sambi, I'll come straight back to you on Mr. Sambi Lokonga and also Granit Xhaka. But it sounds like you've got quite a bit to say about Sambi. So kick us off.
I don't know what it is. Like, what is it that he has the lack of game time? That because I felt like I saw something when he just burst onto the scene. I know he could ping a pass. I know he could he could play a through ball, but there's a drop in confidence in the way that he's playing. He's not as confident as he once was. And in addition to that, I feel like Sambi has taken he takes too many touches before he needs to pass the ball on, which obviously gets players onto him, and he before he's playing a bad pass. So unfortunately I have to put what was a good prospect by the likes of Thierry Henry on the average bar.
Okay, so we'll put him in average for now. And Keith, sorry, not what about Xhaka? Sorry.
Xhaka should be undroppable, bro. Like this
Okay.
guy has turned around this club. His the this is what I have to say about Xhaka. The reputation that Arsenal had over the last 8 to 9 years, and the reputation that Xhaka had for the past 3 years or 2 years has kind of turned around, and it's kind of like the attitude and the new position, everything that Xhaka is now like personifying is what Arsenal is reflecting as a result of that. So he would be the only person I'll put in the undroppable bar. People, you could curse me off. No worries, I could take it. But yeah.
No, very, very good points. The Sambi Lokonga one for me is potentially could do better as opposed to average. I think when you look at the way players that we've already talked about, Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, have turned their form around this season compared to previous seasons, and we're not seeing him kick on, he certainly should be doing better. And I do think it is a confidence thing. I do think it's a lack of minutes thing. You could even put him into that category, depending on the business that we do in January, of a loan move so that he gets those minutes, because at the moment he's just not getting that football that he needs. You know, when you look at his time at Anderlecht, which got him the move in the first place, it was because he was playing every single game, and he's just not getting that at the moment. And Granit Xhaka, when you look at him, you take him out of the side, you know, who else in this team at the moment plays that number 8 role the way he plays that role and offers the goals and that making up that front 5 that we attack with at the moment, you know, who plays that role the same way he does at the moment, looking at the players that we've got on screen. So, yeah, hard to argue with the undroppable tag for Granit Xhaka. But for me, Sambi is someone that could potentially move between could do better or loan. Keith, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, I'll talk about Sambi first. I absolutely agree with Neil. When he first came into the side, I thought, yeah, we've got a player here. Then we played Liverpool the first time we played them last season, and they pressed us to death. And he was playing because I think it was Thomas Partey was injured, and he got absolutely brutalised by their press. And he seems to have stagnated ever since then. And as Neil said, it could be confidence, it could be game time. I would put him in the loan box because I think he needs a loan. I wasn't a huge fan of loaning players out to the French league to start with, but you look at what he's done for Saliba, you look at what he's done for Balogun, somewhere like that would probably do him the world of good. So I would loan him out. Regarding Granit Xhaka, again, entirely agree. He, thus far at this point in the season and what we've seen from him, is undroppable. There's nobody else in our team, as you rightly said, that can do what he does the way he does it. Yeah, undroppable.
I'm glad we all agree on that one, but I definitely think that Sambi needs some sort of change. Definitely some sort of change. Keith, coming to you next. We've got Odegaard and Fabio Vieira, who has once or twice played in that 8 role, or even sometimes as sort of double 10s alongside Odegaard. But I think we can all kind of agree that his out-and-out role when he wants to play is probably as a number 10. But what are your thoughts on Odegaard and Vieira?
I'll start with Vieira. I think we spoke about this again last week. We looked at him and thought, right, he's backup for Odegaard. But then when I saw him playing in the Granit Xhaka role, if you like, I like him there. He's probably as close to being able to do what Xhaka does as anyone. But I haven't really seen enough of him. Obviously, he had the injury at the start of the season. He missed pre-season. So I would put him probably in average at the moment.
Okay.
But it's promising. It's a really promising start. And
it has been, yeah.
As for that Odegaard, sell him. Shit.
Get him out. Get him out.
Get him out. Nah, undroppable for me.
Okay.
I was quite surprised when he got the captain's role to start with, even knowing that he's been the Norwegian national captain for quite a few years now. And there have been a few games where it's not quite clicked for him and he's been subbed off. But you would expect a younger man who's captain who gets subbed off to maybe not respond that well when they get taken out of the game.
Yeah.
But you never see that from him, and I do think we look a much different side with him in it. And I would go so far as to say, if you look at how he played in the first game to how he's played in the last game, he's grown into that role. Not only the role that he plays as a footballer and finding his way in the Premier League, but being captain of this club as well. That's a huge responsibility.
Massive.
And for me, he's undroppable.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument with Odegaard, because the role he plays, especially in that right hand side, with the relationship he has with Bukayo Saka, when Odegaard isn't playing, you can see there's a big difference with the way we affect a game down that right hand side. So I do agree with you there. I think for me personally, I wouldn't quite put him in good. I think if there was, when we were talking about earlier on, if there was that subsection between good and undroppable, I think for me he'd be sort of in between there, because there has been 1 or 2 games for me this season where he hasn't been quite up to the standard that I would think or want from him. But in saying that, maybe that's us Arsenal fans wanting too much at times, because you can't expect them to be dropping 8s and 9s or even 10s out of 10 every single week. But I think when you look at the quality he has, I think we demand it from these players every week now. Maybe we're getting a bit too greedy. Fabio Vieira, definitely agree with you on the average one. We've seen glimpses of quality, especially in the Europa League, even in that final game of the season where he assisted the goal against Wolves for Odegaard, funnily enough. Just absolute sheer quality. So yeah, definitely average. And I can't wait to see what he has to offer next season once he's got that season under his belt. Neil, what are your thoughts, mate?
So I would put Odegaard in that very good category. Not undroppable, because as you rightfully said, he can go missing. He has a little reputation of that. As for Fabio Vieira, I was actually thinking that maybe a loan might do him well.
Okay.
Maybe, get him in a position where he can be playing and really get himself up to speed, get his own skills up to speed, like what makes him a special player. That is Fabio Vieira, because I feel like he's not going to get the game time that he needs to catch up and bring himself up to speed. So I was thinking maybe a loan for Vieira.
Okay. I think this is the first category now where we've all kind of had our first sort of split opinions, and they've all been 3 different types of opinions as well, rather than it be sort of 2 against 1. So really, really, really interesting. The next 2 players I want to speak about, I'm going to sort of single them out, mainly because, Emile Smith Rowe started the season, hasn't really had too much game time, got injured. We haven't really seen too much of him. And Marquinhos, who's come in as a new sign-in, very, very similar story. We've seen him a couple of times in Europa League, played really, really well the first time round, second time round, went missing. We haven't really seen him since. Mm-hmm. So, Keith, I'll come to you first on this one. Emile Smith Rowe, Marquinhos, thoughts?
Marquinhos, I think this kid needs a loan. As you rightly said, the first time we saw him and he scored, and you could see how much it meant to him. And I think he actually cried when he scored the goal.
He did, yeah.
That shows how much it means to him. But maybe at the moment, at the age he is at this stage in his career, it might be a bit too much. And perhaps he needs maybe the back end of the season at a smaller club in a more sedate environment. Again, maybe the French league. But he needs to get some miles in his legs, and just that experience of being on the pitch. Maybe bung him in the Championship. That'd be fun for him.
Be shit
kicked out of him every week. But I think he definitely needs game time. As Neil said earlier about Sambi. As for ESR, you all know how I feel about this kid. He changed things around when we played Chelsea Boxing Day, when we had that awful run, and all of a sudden we've got someone who can move the ball forward fast. And I love him, and I still think he will be a generational box-to-box midfielder. But based on this season, we've hardly seen him. So I don't really...
It's difficult, isn't it?
I really don't know where to put him, because he's Emile Smith Rowe, and I love him to bits. I can't put him where you have. I'd have to say average because he hasn't played, but I can't put him any lower than that.
Yeah, it's difficult with him, and it's interesting as well because when you're looking at the players that we're being linked with or supposedly being linked with, we're being linked with another winger who can play on the left and the right. And although he has played on the left quite a bit, at the end of last season, we started seeing him being brought on as a substitute in the middle of the park quite often. And even at the start of the season, in some of the very few games that we did see him, again, it was quite often in the middle of the park. So
I did prefer him in the middle.
Yeah, it's definitely one to keep an eye on because you look at him playing through the middle. You look at Martinelli with the way he kind of interchanges with Jesus, who we'll get onto in a minute. You know, Martinelli's future could be elsewhere in terms of position-wise. So, yeah, I love the fact that these players can play in so many different positions and Arteta keeps us fans guessing in terms of where these players' futures are positionally moving forward. But Neil, what are your thoughts on these two players mentioned, Marquinhos and ESR?
I agree with Keith here. Like, I think Marquinhos needs a loan move. I think it's going to help him develop because there's a player there. There's no question about it. There's a serious bit of talent with Marquinhos. As for ESR, sell him, get rid of him. I think it's I think you can't put him anywhere else but average for this season. You know, he's been injured. He hasn't played really. Like, you know, what can we say? We could only go based off of what we've seen in previous seasons, really. So, yeah, keep him right there.
Yeah, it's difficult with ESR. So, hopefully, as we've been told, he should be available after the World Cup. So, hopefully, we can see a little bit more of what we saw of him last season. Fingers crossed. And Neil, I'm going to come back to you on the next three. We've got Martinelli, we've got Reece Nelson, and Starboy himself. What are your thoughts on these three players?
Reece Nelson. I don't know, man. I feel like Arsenal is becoming has a reputation of having a bit of a resurrection of players, and like Xhaka now, Reece Nelson. I feel like he really wants the opportunity to break into the team, and he's showing it. But is it enough? Is his history gonna outweigh his current ability? So I'll put him at average. I was gonna put him at could do better, but I'm seeing where he's pushing himself. He's doing more. Sometimes he's more the most outstanding player on the pitch in a stream of 90 minutes. As of recently against Forest and so forth. As for Martinelli and Saka, sell those two sons of bitches. I'm done with them. I think it's time for them to move on. Good, both of them.
Okay. Just good for both of them, yeah?
Just good for both of them. Because of the age, I feel like there's more to come. Keith,
talk to me.
Right, Reece Nelson. Entirely agree with Neil there. Average. I'm a big fan of Arteta's recruitment policy and he's not made many mistakes. But the ones I think he may potentially have made mistakes on is keeping Reece Nelson and keeping Eddie, who we'll probably go on to very shortly. Reece was really, really good against Nottingham Forest, but it was Nottingham Forest. And ever since that game, even though he's one that I really, really want to succeed, I just don't think he quite hits the mark. He's like 24 years old now. And he's been loaned out several times. And I think maybe I would even go so far as to say put him in the bottom box, just sell him. Regarding Martinelli and Saka, sell them as well. They're just awful. I've run out of patience with a pair of them. It's like they never run. They don't take anyone on. On what I've seen so far this season, they've proved themselves to be undroppable. Who else could do what they do in our squad? So I'm going to very respectfully disagree with my friend in Florida, and I would say undroppable for both of them because no one else can do what they do in our squad.
Very, very good point. Right, Reece Nelson. I'm going to agree with you, Keith, on this one. I think when you look at the golfing quality of the likes of Martinelli and Bukayo Saka and then Reece Nelson, obviously that one very good game where he scored 2 goals coming off the bench and changed the game. But since then, when he has come on, it hasn't quite done it for me. You know, he's 23, 24 now. How much longer do you hold on to the player? And when you look at who we're being linked with in January or potentially the summer, you know, how much further does that push him down the pecking order? And if Marquinhos goes out on loan and comes back, you know, where does it put? When you look at it like that, for me, it's a sell. Maybe not necessarily in January, maybe at the end of the season. But for me, I think, you know, his time is up, whether it's January or the end of the season. I don't think
we'll see Joe Willock situation, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to kind of look at it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
very, very, very similar because there are glimpses of quality there, you know, but it's, for me, there's not enough consistency. And I don't think, you know, over the course of sort of 10 to 15 games, you know, is he going to offer what you get from a Bukayo Saka or a Martinelli, you know, whether it's on the left or the right-hand side, because he can play on both sides. But are you going to get the same return in terms of goals and assists or level of threat? For me, it's a no, and that's one of the reasons why I'd look to move him on. So I do agree with you with that one there, Keith. And again, I'm going to agree with you on Martinelli and Saka as well, for the sole reason that when you look at the reasoning behind why we put Granit Xhaka in that undroppable category, you take Granit Xhaka out of that number 8 role, who do you put in that role that gives you the same return? There isn't a same player that does that, and it's the same with Martinelli and Bukayo Saka. You take them out of left and right wing, you look at who we've got as replacements in who can offer the same return and level of quality. There just isn't anyone in this squad at the moment. Even if you had an ESR on the same sort of form as last season, I think the way Martinelli started this year, Martinelli would still be getting in this side on that left for me. So, okie dokie. Last category of the evening. We've got Eddie Nketiah and Gabriel Jesus. Keith, I'll come to you first on this one to finish up. What are your thoughts and where should they go?
Eddie, man, he's another one. I really want him to succeed, and I know people lost their shit when he got the number 14 shirt, but it's not like, you know, it's not like that number 24 that's behind me, which has been retired and hangs up at the Staples Centre. It's like 14 is just a football shirt, but the gulf between him and Jesus is huge. And I actually prefer Eddie as a winger. I think he makes a very decent winger, but he hasn't got enough presence about him. And I'm afraid, for me, he has to stay where he is.
Okay.
Not another loan. I think it's probably time just to sell him. I know we haven't got any other strikers at the moment. Bring Flo back. Excuse me. But personally, I would sell him. And the fact that we've just given him a nice big bumper contract makes his market value as high as it possibly can be. Whereas this time last year, he had a year left on his contract, which made him a £10 million player. He's probably a £20-25 million player, and you know,
yeah,
a club
probably.
like, I don't know, Crystal Palace, West Ham, someone like that, he would do well for them. He's still a Premier League striker, but we've got aspirations to be in the Champions League, to even, you know, push to win the title at some point. He's not quite there for me. As for Mr. Jesus, I know he hasn't scored as many goals as you would expect from a number 9, but I think Mikel Arteta has conned us, and he quite often plays false 9 without us even realising it.
Yeah, he does.
And I absolutely adore this guy. His work rate, the way he just drags everybody else up by his own standards. And he's so unselfish. And I mentioned this with Benjamin White earlier about being unselfish. That is such a massive part of being a member of a team. And this guy's got to be undroppable because, again, we haven't got anybody that does what he does. Martinelli at a push could probably do it, but he's still raw. I love this guy. Undroppable.
Okay. Definitely agree with you on the Jesus one in terms of what he brings to this team, not just goals. Because when you look at last season before Aubameyang left, and then the numbers that Lacazette was producing in the second half of the season, there were a lot of complaints because neither of them were offering anything more beyond the very few goals that they were offering. And the only threat they did offer probably was goals. When you look at Jesus, like you quite rightly said, his work rate, the effect he has on his colleagues, the way he pulls players out of position to create space for the likes of Martinelli to run into, the assists that he's giving and stuff like that, it is just head and shoulders beyond what Lacazette and Aubameyang offered. Go on, Keith.
If I could just put my hand up, sir. Just something I wanted to add to that I forgot to say just now.
Sure.
Like, he doesn't look the biggest guy in the world. He's probably, 6 foot, but he looks like 5'8" when I watch him on the telly.
Yeah.
And his strength when he's holding the ball up, when he's got his back to defenders, that's probably shocked me more than anything else about his gameplay is how physically strong he is.
Yeah.
And his hold-up play as well is phenomenal.
Yeah, there was that one goal. He didn't score it, but he had a hand in against Bournemouth where the ball came out of the air, and I can't remember who was marking him now. I think it might have been Mepham, who's quite a big lad. And the role he played in that, where he brought the ball down and then went past 2 or 3 players before slipping someone in, like you quite rightly said, his physicality and the way he holds that ball up for a player of his stature, you wouldn't normally relate the two, and he does it ever so well. And Judge makes a very good point here. He's unstoppable with inhuman work rate. And that brings me on to Eddie Nketiah. Before I speak with yourself, Neil, very quickly, I would put Eddie Nketiah in could do better. And the only reason why I put him in could do better, a couple of different reasons, is number one, if Jesus were to get suspended or injured, this is the guy that we're most likely going to rely on moving forward. So he needs to pick himself up off the floor between now and the end of the season. So for me, he's playing for his place at Arsenal Football Club between now and the end of the season, because you've got the likes of Balogun, who's scoring quite frequently over in Ligue 1, and Arsenal will spend beyond what we buy players in January as well. And it could be a striker. There were rumours in the summer that we were being linked with strikers because Arteta wanted 3 players to pick between. So for me, he has to do better between now and the end of the season. Otherwise, like you said, Keith, I think that's when he moves into that sell position, because there are going to be other players that we can bring in who will do better than him. At the moment, Jesus doesn't really, in my opinion, have any competition, because when he has been brought on as a sub, when he has come on or been selected in these cup games, yes, he's bagged himself a few goals. Yes, he's shown good work rate. But when you compare the two, there's a golfing quality there. And there are other players that will push Jesus, in my opinion, much further than what Eddie Nketiah is at the moment. Neil, what are your thoughts?
As much as I want to agree with you with regards to Eddie, and he needs to pick up himself, I think he's had enough time to do that. And I think it's time to move him on. I think it's time for him to move on from the club. And I know, I would like to see Eddie succeed. I want to see Eddie score 15, 16, 17 goals in a season for us.
Same.
It would bring me no more joy to see that, because he struggled a lot. And for him to achieve that would be immense. But he's just not that type of player, I believe. And I feel like he would do better elsewhere. Not even in the Prem, somewhere else, somewhere where he is allowed to be, spend more time on the ball and do the things that he wants to do to be able to score goals. With regards to Jesus, I think, like Keith rightly said, like his work rate, what he does, he brings everyone else's level up, even though he's not scoring goals. Like, we get that, and we see that what Mikel Arteta is trying to do with this false nine thing, like what Jesus brings to the team, no one else really does not do that. There's no one else. There's no one else that does that. So I'll keep him in the undroppable spot.
Perfect. I don't think we can argue much more beyond the places that we've put these players in. I'm quite surprised, actually, that no players fell into the could do better category. I thought there might have been one or two that fell into that particular category. And I'm gonna do this again with the guys, possibly a fourth member as well at the end of the season to see how much this has changed. I'm sure it will have changed depending on how Arsenal gets on. It is something that I'm probably quite keen on doing each and every season moving forwards, because a lot of these players will stay at Arsenal long term, and it'll be really, really interesting to see, how this changes and how this compares season on season, especially with the likes of, Jesus, Bukayo Saka, Martinelli, and many, many more who will be at the club for hopefully, years and years and years to come. That is going to wrap up the first part of today's live show. Unfortunately, due to some change in circumstance, that is all we're going to have time for today. So what I'm going to do, and it allows my lovely panelists here today a little bit more time, another week in fact.
Is that because I spoke too much? I waffled on too much, didn't I? I took all your time up.
No, don't be so silly. But it does give my panelists another week to get their thinking caps on, to think about their Premier League team of the season so far. We'll be looking at that next week, Saturday, potentially Sunday, depending on availability. So do keep an eye out for that on the channel. But before we do wrap things up, go ahead and like today's live stream if you have enjoyed today's show. Much appreciated. Subscribe if you're new around here. Check out memberships as well for a small monthly fee. You may have an opportunity to feature alongside these handsome fellas and actually get your opinions as well on screen. So do go check those out. But before we wrap things up, a massive thank you to Keith and Neil. Keith, if people do want to socialise with you about Arsenal football or other weird matters beyond that, where can they find you?
Firstly, you probably wouldn't want to socialise with me because I'm a miserable old bastard most of the time. But you can find me on Twitter at the Mad Rambling One. I'm having a bit of a hiatus from my own content at the moment. There's stuff I want to do, but I'm trying to work out the best way to do it. So there is nothing there at the moment. So find me on Twitter. I live there pretty much all the time. But the most important thing is to like this show, subscribe to Arsenal Analysed, hit the notification bell. If you feel like being a member, be a member. But also look up this geezer at the bottom of the screen, BenchWarmerz with a Z, because seriously, one of the most underrated content creators that you'll ever see on YouTube. So he's going to say a bit more about what he does, but seriously, real intelligent stuff. And the guy's got the smoothest voice that you'll ever see anywhere. Over to you, Neil, my friend.
Oh Neil, yeah, I don't know if I can introduce you any better than Keith.
That
has
isn't.
So crack on.
That's an amazing outro.
I could listen to you talk all day.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And yes, you could find me on YouTube as the BenchWarmerz podcast with a Z, and on Twitter, BenchWarmerz podcast, and Instagram and Facebook, Neil Walker, the Realtor. If you want to come find a house, this is the place to find it. All right, Jake, thank you so much. And always a pleasure to be alongside the legend himself, Keith, the Godfather.
Likewise.
Well, look, I appreciate you both for coming along this evening. I really do. All the details for their YouTube channels, socials are down in the description below. So go and check them out as soon as you're finished watching today's show. Thank you for everyone in the chat for coming along and giving your opinions, liking the stream and all that good stuff. But for now, I'm JC and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe and take care.